Hello everybody and welcome back to another not applicable Formula 1 video. I hope that you're well. I hope you're ready for 2022 because we're just a couple of weeks away from seeing some of the 2022 cars. We obviously know the 2022 grid and I'm so excited to get into this new season. And I was thinking about the new season and thinking about Formula 1 in general recently, and the fact that with all these new regulations, it's possibility that we could come up with a season where all these cars are very, very close to each other, almost like a spec series. And I was thinking to myself, well, if we did have a spec series in Formula 1, which team has the best driver lineup to be able to achieve over the next few years in this new era we're moving into? So I thought that would be a really nice video for us to discuss and talk through and give my opinion on the teams that I think are going to do best in this next era of Formula 1, purely down to their driver lineup. So if the cars were equal, who would do best? I think we're going to start at the bottom because it's fairly obvious that Haas definitely have the worst driver pairing. You know, they have improved, and obviously they were in their rookie season last year, but Nikita Mazepin is still the slowest driver on the grid by a big margin. And Mick Schumacher did improve, but had lots of crashes, lots of spins. I know it usually takes him a little while to get into a Formula 1 or even to a new series, but still wasn't great from Mick Schumacher and didn't really gain any experience of battling in the midfield. I think if it was a spec series, those two would really struggle still. Then just above them in 9th place, I've put Williams Formula 1. I like the fact they've brought in Albon, although I do think it is a little bit of a downgrade on George Russell. And then you've got Latifi. Latifi's a bit of a weird one. We don't really know how good or how bad he's going to be. Obviously, was battling with George Russell last year. Didn't manage to stand out in that Williams car too much. And it's going to be tough for him because I think Albon coming into the team is another driver who's expected to beat him. And it's tough when you're always the secondary driver in most people's opinions. But I feel like Latifi will take steps forward over the next couple of years and we could see some big things from him. Moving up then to Alfa Romeo, I've got in 8th place. I think Valtteri Bottas really does lift this team above those other two. Obviously, Zhao, we have no idea what he's going to be like. He's moving into the seat, and lots of people are talking about whether or not he deserves that seat, whether or not he's just there because obviously he's got the money to bring to Formula 1. But let's not forget, he was in Formula 2 beforehand and has shown himself to be a pretty decent driver. Yes, probably not on the level of some of the other drivers that are still in Formula 2, but has done enough, in my opinion, to show that, he was going to get a Formula 1 seat eventually at some time, and 2022 seems like a fairly decent time to move into Formula 1. And then Bottas, obviously 10 race wins for Bottas, had a pretty good season last year, ended up 3rd in the championship. So Alfa Romeo getting a very, very good driver in that seat. Had 5 years at Mercedes, never really got the opportunity to battle with Hamilton, but on his day, he can definitely put his name in the hat. And I think, Alfa Romeo is one of those ones that teeters because the fact that I rate Bottas so highly, I maybe could have moved them slightly higher in this list, but also the fact that Zhou is a bit of an unknown and we don't know what he's going to be like in Formula 1 in the next few years. It's tricky to gauge where Alfa Romeo are going to be, so I've slotted them in 8th place. In 7th place, I've got AlphaTauri. I think AlphaTauri have a really good team dynamic. I love the two Alpha drivers, but it's just in a similar vein to Alfa Romeo. This team has a clear best driver and a driver who's, just been through his rookie season and really didn't have the best of times. So if you're looking at definitely Gasly versus Bottas, I think Bottas is slightly better in terms of where he's been in his career, but Gasly has a much higher ceiling. And then similar with Tsunoda and Zhou, I think Tsunoda, obviously, with a season in Formula 1, is going to be the better of those two drivers and has a much higher ceiling than Zhou as well. So I've gone for AlphaTauri in 7th place. Tsunoda obviously came in with loads of hype last season, and AlphaTauri didn't really deliver when it came to the Constructors' Championship for me. I think they should have been above Alpine, considering the car that they had and the consistency that Gasly could show, but Gasly, for me, still one of the best drivers on the grid. Absolutely phenomenal in terms of his point return, 110 points last year, and definitely is in my top 5 drivers on the grid. Whether or not that does enough to bring the team up with Tsunoda having, a 50-50 season, and if Tsunoda steps up, I think AlphaTauri will move further up in this list in my future rankings, but at the moment, I've got them in at 7th place because it was tough to really gauge them against the next couple of teams that are coming up. Because in 6th place, I've put Aston Martin. And Again, I think they have a really strong lineup, and I actually really quite like the Aston Martin lineup. I get a lot of stick for not really liking Aston Martin that much, but I do quite like both of their drivers. Stroll, I actually really think is worthy of that Formula One seat. Had a tough season last year, obviously finished just behind his teammate, and we've got to remember Vettel did have a podium in there, so without that podium, it's a lot closer between those two. And Stroll, I think is in a similar sort of aspect to Ocon for me, like a very worthy of his Formula One seat, but never is going to take that step up and be like world championship worthy. I think he's always going to be in those middling teams, and the fact that obviously his dad now owns Aston Martin, he always gets thrown at him, but I think he deserves to be there. I think he'll be at Aston Martin for a long time, and I don't think he'll ever battle for titles, but will be a fairly decent Formula One driver. And then obviously Vettel's just struggled over the last few seasons, and apart from Verstappen, let's remember that Vettel is the only driver that's really pushed Hamilton to the limit. I guess you could argue Rosberg in there as well, but Rosberg was in the same team. But Vettel in the Ferrari was the only team that really pushed Lewis Hamilton. And let's not remember that in both of those seasons where they battled, Vettel was actually in the lead of the championship for quite a considerable time before dropping off towards the end. I think it's just over the last 3 seasons, we've really seen a decline in Vettel. Obviously, Ferrari decided to pivot and go with Charles Leclerc. I think that was the right decision from Ferrari with Sebastian Vettel aging that little bit. And we've seen with Carlos Sainz coming in that they have ranked higher than this Aston Martin team, in my opinion. But I think if Vettel was given the right car, he could still do good things. Whether or not he could still win a championship, I'm a little bit 50-50. I think the heartbreak of being dropped from Ferrari obviously went there because of Michael Schumacher. It's tough for Sebastian Vettel, and I need to see a little bit more for me to be able to push them a little bit higher in terms of my rankings. I think 6th place is about where they slot in, because it's very close actually between them and this next team that I've got in 5th place, which is Alpine. I think Ocon is slightly better than Stroll, and I think Vettel and Alonso is such a close battle. That is so incredibly close to me that I've just put Alpine the tiniest little margin ahead of Aston Martin in terms of their driver lineup, because Ocon and Alonso just look like a lovely partnership throughout 2022. We're going to see, again, that friendship that they built up. 2021, they were always battling for each other, and I know lots of people have said Alonso will change if they're given a car that can win a championship, but we've still got that dynamic between them, which was so lovely. Ocon hasn't quite lived up to the hype, in my opinion. I thought he was going to come into this season and beat Alonso, and especially after winning a race as well, I thought he was going to beat Alonso, but Alonso was still able to come out on top in the Drivers' Championship. Although they made 5th place in the Constructors look fairly easy by the end of the season. I think mainly because Tsunoda dropped off, to be honest. And Alonso, clearly one of the best drivers of this era. Again, I'm sort of wrapping him in and amongst that Vettel sort of dynamic as to whether or not Vettel or Alonso is the better driver is a bit of a 50-50 for me. I think in terms of last year, Alonso was much better. Moving forward, Alonso's a lot older, maybe will start to drop off a little bit more than Vettel, so it's an interesting dynamic that we'll see between Alpine and Aston Martin over the next few years, and I think those two teams will be battling quite heavily between each other, and I'm quite looking forward to, Ocon versus Stroll, Vettel versus Alonso in 2022 to see who will come out on top. In my opinion, I think it's going to be the Alpine drivers that come out on top. In 4th place, and this is where it gets tricky, because we've got McLaren, Red Bull, Mercedes, and Ferrari left over, and McLaren I've popped in at 4th place, because as much as I absolutely love Daniel Ricciardo, I think he has really dropped off, and I don't think he's ever going to get back to the level he was before, and Norris looks like he could be the driving force of this team moving forward. I think when Daniel Ricciardo came into McLaren, I thought to myself, my goodness me, we've upgraded on Carlos Sainz. Carlos Sainz has moved to Ferrari, and Daniel Ricciardo has come into this McLaren team, and I thought was going to be an upgrade on Carlos Sainz. I think now we've realised that actually Carlos Sainz was the driver McLaren needed to sort of really juxtapose Lando Norris, and McLaren have maybe downgraded slightly with Daniel Ricciardo, especially in 2021. Whether that will continue on in 2022, Daniel Ricciardo is quite a bit older than Carlos Sainz, but the new regulations are coming in that kind of suit Daniel Ricciardo's driving style that little bit more, with the cars being a little bit closer to one another and him being able to late brake into those corners. Ricciardo's just dropped in my estimations. I've got big hopes for him in 2022, but I couldn't put McLaren any higher than 4th in these rankings just because Lando Norris is clearly holding up that team. Is Lando Norris as good as those top drivers in those 3 teams left? It's close. I don't think he's at the level of Hamilton, Verstappen, or Leclerc yet, although he's had an incredible 3rd season, and taking up the mantle as that number 1 in the McLaren team was incredibly impressive from him. And as I said, I thought when Carlos Sainz left, McLaren were going to drop back a little bit, but if anything, Lando Norris stepped up and filled in those points that we needed. Then we've got 3rd place. I've gone for Red Bull, and I think this is mainly down to Sergio Perez. I think Max Verstappen, obviously, should be higher in this list, and I think Max Verstappen is in the top 2 drivers on the grid right now. Clearly, he is a world champion, and moving forward is a lot younger than Lewis Hamilton, so you would imagine is going to get even better still. And this Red Bull dynamic that they've got with a clear number 1 and Perez coming in as a clear number 2, I quite like. But I think at the same time, Perez does drag the sort of overall team grade down a little bit in my estimations. Like, it just doesn't look like he's ever going to be that driver that tests Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc, Lando Norris, George Russell for those titles in the future. I think Perez has been an incredible stalwart of Formula One, has been around for long enough that we know he's got quality and we know he can deliver in every single Formula One car he's been in. But he is not the level of those guys above. I think you could fit Perez into a similar sort of mold of Stroll and Ocon. Like, I think they're in that midfieldy battle. Obviously, Sergio Perez I rate much higher than Ocon and Stroll, but I think he's in that level where they're never going to take that step up into the top echelons of Formula One. If Red Bull do manage to get in Gasly in the next couple of seasons, I think this ranking changes a little bit for me. I think Red Bull are a lot closer to the top 2 we've got left to talk about, but at the same time, Sergio Perez, Max Verstappen, I'm quite happy with slotting them into 3rd place at this point in time. Now we move into the top 2. Obviously, we've got Ferrari left and Mercedes left. We've got the current Constructors' Champions, but obviously George Russell's just come in, versus a very fresh-looking Ferrari team who managed to just pip McLaren to 3rd place towards the end of the season, and mainly down to Daniel Ricciardo not performing. So it's a bit of a tricky top 2. I think these top 2 are fairly interchangeable for me, but Hamilton and George Russell I'm going to put in 2nd place. Hamilton is clearly, for me, the best driver of this generation and possibly still the best driver on the Formula One grid. Max Verstappen fans are going to hate me for that, but I think Lewis Hamilton has maybe 3 seasons left in Formula One at an absolute maximum 4. And there's definitely a clock on him, you know. Let's face it, we've seen Hamilton at his absolute best, and we're now heading towards Hamilton in the twilight of his career. And then on the flip side of that, it's the beginning of this next chapter for George Russell. Obviously did fairly well in the Williams last year, got 15th place. Was he ever going to get any more than that? Probably not. But to gauge where George Russell is going to be in the next 3 seasons is so incredibly difficult, because as quick as he was in the Williams, and as incredibly highly as I do rate him, we haven't seen what he's like when the real pressure of having to deliver podiums consistently is on. And, you know, we saw Albon, we saw Gasly, they crumbled that little bit when they got into Red Bull and that pressure was really on them. Are we going to see something like that from George Russell? I really hope not. I don't think so, but it is a possibility, and it's something that we have to take into account. You know, since he's joined the Formula One grid from F2, that Mercedes seat has always been in the works for him. It's always been, okay, George Russell is going to take that Mercedes seat. It's going to be when, not if. And now he's got that opportunity. There's big pressure on him. And you know what? Lewis Hamilton, George Russell is so close to being the best team on the grid, in my opinion, if this was a full works Formula One setup. But I'm going to put Ferrari in 1st place. Just undoubtedly for me, the best lineup in 2021. And I'm going to continue to say that into 2022. Carlos Sainz and Charles Leclerc have just got everything for me. Like, They're both young enough that they're going to be in Formula One for maybe the next 10 to 15 years, and yet they have so much experience. We're talking about Carlos Sainz, who's been at 4 different Formula One teams now, been there, done it, seen it, and now looks like he's really coming into fruition. And then Charles Leclerc obviously came into Ferrari as such a hot prospect and hasn't really shown as much in the last couple of seasons as he maybe did in 2019, I would say Charles Leclerc's best season was. But at the same time, this lineup is just incredible. It's got room to grow. It's got quality in there already. It's got 2 drivers who are going to be hungry for wins and championships over the next few seasons. And I absolutely love what Ferrari have done. Like, they are just head and shoulders above the other teams, in my opinion. If we're looking in 3 years' time, when Mercedes have to replace Lewis Hamilton and Perez has probably moved on from Red Bull, I think Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz are still going to be there, and they're still going to be incredibly high quality for Ferrari. But that's just my opinion on the teams moving into 2022 and where I think they would slot if obviously the 2022 cars were all the same moving into next year and beyond. I'm sure you've got some comments down below that are gonna, question some of these decisions, and I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments down below. Subscribe if you are new to the channel as well. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.